Now, all of these things are cooked up in the equivalent of ivory tower at the Fraser Institute, and I know that there are an awful lot of devils in details. I also know from all of the people who have discussed this morning that there are bad experiences with temporary work visas. I would say nothing is perfect. Nothing certainly that government does is perfect. But I think dominating our future policy should be the principle with which I started. Take it out of the hand of the bloody bureaucrats and the politicians. The private people who decide whether somebody is employable and turn a decent income in Canada will probably also try to be cheating and serve their own interests. But we can constrain them, and I trust them infinitely more than I trust the guys who are running the current system, who got us the system that we have. It's worth trying. Certainly, we should discuss it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to our two speakers for these brilliant presentations. So we'll have a period of questions. So keep in mind we have a maximum of 1 minute, if possible, to let more people ask questions. But I will abuse my position and ask the first question myself. I may take more than 1 minute. So there are not now studies in Canada about the wages of immigrants compared to native wages. And one suggestion is that the deterioration of wages of immigrants is explained mainly by two factors. The structure of immigration, because as you know now, most of immigrants are coming from what we call non-traditional countries like Asia, Africa, and Latin America, whereas in the 60s we have more than 80% coming from Western Europe and US. And the economic studies suggest that almost 2/3 of the deterioration in wages of immigrants is explained by the change in the structure of countries of origin and the non-recognition of foreign experience. I would like to ask, did you look at how the cost of immigration evolved over time, like say from the 60s, where we had more immigrants coming from traditional countries compared to, say, in the 90s or the 2000s, and see whether we can explain how much of this cost is explained by these changes in the structure of immigration. Because what economic studies suggest is if Canada keep the same structure as in the 60s, we will not have these problems today regarding wages and access to employment. Do you agree if the structure, not necessarily the problem with the number, but the problem is with the structure of immigration, having these immigrants coming from different countries now? If we didn't change the structure, would we have that huge cost you just showed to us?
Well, my dear friend, I will not touch that subject. If I brought it up anywhere where there are hostile media, I would be immediately accused of being a racist. Because after all, I'm referring to the increase of immigrants from non-traditional European countries. I want to stay away from that very far as much as I can. Let us concentrate on what has been the criteria, the objective point criteria that have been used in the selection. And it's quite clear, it used to be on the basis of, do you have work experience? And now it is, do you have a university degree? And it is obvious to me that the criterion of having a university is not working. The real question is, I think that you raised, is why is the university degree as a criterion not as successful as we had expected? And there are 4 different possibilities, which I will not bore you with. The one that appeals to me most is, already mentioned this morning, the fact is that a university degree from Harvard is not comparable with a university degree from the Outer Manchurian State College. It's also not comparable with a person who holds a degree which he bought in a corner store around the corner from the Canadian Embassy. Because we don't have any way of testing effectively whether these guys bought their certificates or whether they earned them. And thirdly, what is an engineer in Canada is not what is an engineer in Burma. How do we know? Can we trust a person like that to build a bridge? Can we trust a person like that to treat our children because they're ill and they have a medical degree? Well, I'm glad I'm not responsible for having to approve people to build bridges and to pass, to practice medicine. You know, just put yourself in the position of these people who have to make these approvals. How are they going to make that on the basis of the information that they have? I should be short because there are lots of people there.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I promised to be short because also Blarim took at least 2 minutes for his question. So I have two short questions. One is for Stephen. So Stephen, in the U.S., with all the numbers you show us about the cost and benefit and so on, obviously the education of the immigrants matter a lot in the U.S. So are you ready to say that in the U.S. the issue about immigration is more about the selection of the immigrants rather than the numbers of immigrants you have in the U.S.? So that's my short questions. And for Professor Grubel, as a student, I had the chance to read some of your 180 papers that you publish in Academic Review. And if I'm wrong, you let me know. But I believe that you are in favor of free trade, so in favor of the mobility of goods and services, and you're probably also in favor of the mobility of capital. But when you're talking about human resources, like you did just a few minutes ago, you seem to be rather protectionist. Is it because of the presence of the welfare state? For instance, if we didn't have a welfare state so generous in Canada, would you be more in favor of the mobility of the human resources across country? Thank you.
On the question of education, very briefly, obviously numbers matter a whole lot because if all of your immigrants were very low educational attainment, but you only had 100 of them, then it wouldn't matter to the society as a whole, though it might matter to how well they do for those individuals. So obviously numbers matter. But from a fiscal point of view, just purely fiscal, the fundamental problem would be mostly educational attainment, assuming away the large population growth, immigration. The U.S. population, in case you're wondering, grows by the equivalent of Canada every decade. So you know that is, and about 80% of that is new immigration or births to immigrants. So in that sense, numbers matter enormously in a fiscal related way because of the infrastructure and congestion maybe that creates in the U.S. or adds to in the U.S. But from a fiscal point of view, and only a fiscal point of view, educational attainment is sort of the key issue.
I just say that really a clip answer to the first question that directed at me. Foolish consistency is a hobgoblin of small minds. But I think it's more than that. I think we have a right as a society to put in whatever we wish in terms of income redistribution and so on. I don't like that either. But as far as it has gone, it probably has gone too far. But for us then to say that there is somehow, because of this abstract reasoning that I've given you in this fine, clear graph that I had, that therefore it's in the interest of the world and of humanity to have free immigration is just not, it's not in the cards. Yeah, if we could get rid of the welfare state or reduce it significantly, yes, but as several people have already said, this is a pipe dream.
Question for Steve. Steve, you and colleagues and others over many years have done an awful lot of research about these questions in the United States, and you presented it to Congress. My question is, how does the political system then work? Does Congress follow the research, or does it follow other incentives as we do in Canada?
Yeah, it's the other incentives. The way this research is used is the way that research people who tend to emphasize the benefits of immigration. In a debate, you need your facts to pull out, to justify your existing position, whatever side of the immigration debate you're on. So in that sense, the research affects the arguments. And sometimes there is a breakthrough that research does have an impact, but mostly congressmen just take their pre-existing assumptions and look for facts that justify that. So.
But on the other hand, this number of $18 billion that I had there was published in 2005. A few months ago, or last year, one of the leading journalists at the National Post used that figure in an article discussing the cost of immigration, all the other factors, social, cultural, and so on, that I stayed away from, that other people have discussed. He used that number without attribution. Now, these numbers are getting repeated again and again. And at some point in the future, some people will say, you know, let's really have a debate over this. And then we can pull it out. And the politicians will not be able to get away with that anymore, of just totally ignoring it. We must be patient. We must continue to do our job. Maybe that is going to be the only satisfaction we'll ever have. But nevertheless, there is always a hope, and it never dies. Hope never dies.
There's
no expiration date. It's so beautiful. Every time I don't get the Nobel Prize, I say that to myself.
I have a question about temporary foreign workers, or guest workers, I think as they're called in the United States. Now, Herb Grubel had outlined one of his recommendations, which is, I think, looks at the fact that many skilled immigrants have not had good labor outcomes here, and basically what you're saying, Herb, is that when you bring someone in as a skilled selected immigrant, there should be a trial period, and if they do well and they're needed, let's keep them and benefit Canada. And there are examples of that in Australia. For example, if you're an entrepreneur, you get your visa, but it's provisional until you've got a going business in Australia, and if you don't produce one, you go. That's not the case in Canada. I guess my question is this. Your proposal is mainly to how to select good, permanent, skilled immigrants, but there are also temporary worker programs that simply, some may be able to convert to a permanent basis, but a lot of them are intended as temporary workers. I think, Steve, your organization has probably done more research on these issues and whether temporary workers who really are intended as temporary worker programs are successful, and in fact you find a lot of complications sometimes. The reason I raise it is that we've expanded exponentially into temporary worker programs in Canada, and I'd like to hear your comments on temporary worker programs in general, not the type that Herb is necessarily talking about, where they're aimed really at testing people who are going to come here permanently to see if they're successful.
You're such a clever bugger. I'll have to amend my proposal. Temporary work visa class A, these are the berry pickers, and temporary work visas B, who are the high-tech workers. Okay.
Well, in a paper by Michael